Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the Eye on College Basketball YouTube channel. My name is David Cobb from CBS Sports. I'm joined by Adam Finklestein, the Director of Scouting at 247. And Adam, how are you today, sir?
Doing great. Thanks. How about you?
Yeah, not bad, not bad. As always, there is plenty to discuss in the world of college basketball player acquisition, if you want to call it that in this era. The transfer portal deadline has passed for players to enter the portal. But that doesn't mean that everyone in the portal has committed. In fact, there's still some pretty big fish out there who are on the horizon, who are going to have an impact on college basketball next season. Some of those guys have choices to make about what they're going to do next. And Adam, you've seen a few of those guys this week, a few that come to mind off the top of my head who were at the NBA Combine and also in the portal. You got Josh Minot, who played his freshman season at Memphis, Patrick Baldwin Jr., who was at Milwaukee this past year playing for his father, and then Matthew Meyer, a seasoned college basketball veteran with a national title under his belt at Baylor. So these guys have some tough decisions to make. Were you able to pick up any insights maybe on what might be in store for a few of these guys?
Yeah, it's interesting when you're in Chicago because it's so much more than just what's going on in the official combine activities, both from the NBA and from college basketball perspective, because you've got all the NBA front office guys there, you've got all the agents there, you've got a ton of college coaches there, and then you have these players who are on the fence about, am I going to the NBA, am I going to college? And during media availability, everybody's asking those same questions. What are you doing? What's your timeline? What are going to be the key variables in your decision? And, some guys are more forthright than others. I think the one who was most forthright was Pat Baldwin. And it sounds like he is intent to stay in the draft. He said yesterday on Thursday that he is 99.9% committed to the draft, just leaving himself enough wiggle room in the event that he suffers an injury during this process that really derails his hopes of getting to the NBA. So leaving himself the flexibility for that contingency plan, but it sounds like he is headed to the pros. The other guy who it sounds like is really focused on the pro process is Josh Minot, obviously multi-talented. Don't think we saw his best basketball at Memphis yet last year, but NBA executives really intrigued by the size, the playmaking ability, the athleticism, the passing ability at his size. So he's someone that I'm not sure we're going to see back in college basketball again. Another interesting thing, the top guy in Travis Branham's transfer rankings, Emoni Bates, he's obviously not eligible for this year's draft, but he was in Chicago, got a chance to see him work out a little bit and, just shot it beautifully. And he's someone now that we are not expecting to make a decision until next month, which could coincide with after a lot of these NBA players have to make their decisions. So the timing there is going to line up.
There's been a few fairly high-profile transfer commits this week, like Kevin McCullough, Texas Tech guy. He's going to be going to Kansas. That's a big one. But it feels to me, and you talking about Emoni Bates like that, it feels to me like we're kind of waiting for the big dominoes to fall because, one, we got to get to the June withdrawal date to figure out who's even going to be available in the portal. And then you got guys like Tyrese Hunter, who I don't think are really courting the pros so much, but man, is he a high-profile potential transfer. And then you got some other really high-quality guards who might be waiting to figure out their landing spots, based on what he does. And so
even Tyrese Hunter, though, his process is going to be impacted by the NBA draft process because two of his top choices, Kansas and Gonzaga's got an opportunity. They could potentially bring back Julian Strawther. They could potentially bring back Rasir Bolton. They could potentially bring back Drew Timme. So we know they've got their three sophomores coming back next year, led by Nolan Hickman in the backcourt. But the opportunity at Gonzaga is going to be very much tied to what their players going through the draft process decide to do. And so that's going to have major implications on what he decides to do in, I almost called it free agency, in the transfer portal. So I do think that the NBA draft and draft process is going to have implications on a lot of these guys.
Yeah, no doubt. Okay, let's put you in a hypothetical situation, and then I'll do the same. Let's say that you're the head coach at Finklestein State University. It's an expansion team in NCAA Division I. And since you're joining the fray late in the game, all the coaches around the country have agreed to let you have your first pick. from guys in the transfer portal. And your AD wants you to win next year. So yeah. FSU has got to be at least in the hunt for an NCAA tournament bid next year. And you get to pick, you get your first pick of the guys in the portal. And in fact, you can take Minot or Baldwin too if you want, because they're in there. So who are you taking? I mean, who's the guy that you think is still available out there in the portal that, you know, could potentially be that big time scorer or the big time player for a decent to good or maybe even great college program next year?
You know, I think in terms of it's one of two guys in my mind. It's Emoni Bates or it's Tyrese Hunter, who I think is gonna, you know, we've just talked about whether it's Gonzaga or Kansas. I mean, let's put this in perspective. Gonzaga and Kansas are two programs that expect to contend for national championships again next year. And Hunter's going to have an opportunity to step right in and play a significant role. He's already proven he can do that at the very highest levels of college basketball, whereas a lot of these transfers are seeking out a different level, going from mid-major to high major, or seeking out a different opportunity because they didn't produce in their last one. That is not the case with him. And so that's why I think if it's just about who's going to give you the most impact in 1 year, he's probably my choice. If it's about who's the top prospect, though, that's when I'd go with Emoni Bates.
Yeah, interesting. I might go Isaiah Mosley from Missouri State. A little bit of a wild card in this process, and not somebody who's generated a ton of buzz just in terms of the headlines surrounding his recruitment. But some of the best schools in the country have been in on him, and so I mean, it's almost like a who's who of major programs when you look at Isaiah Mosley, a little bit of a bigger bodied guard who still shoots it really well from the outside, and then could, you know, help you out on the boards as well. So, you know, it's interesting. He's one of those dominoes yet to fall. Maybe not somebody as mainstream who I think could have an impact on the sport next season. Who's number two? I guess so. Is it Bates for you, or who would you go if Hunter were taken off the board and you were just
I know I cheated and I took both Hunter and Bates in that number one slot, so I apologize, I broke the rules, but I think I would probably say Pat Baldwin, just watching him. So he didn't test well athletically in Chicago, but he measured pretty well. I mean, he's 6'10 plus, he's got a big frame, and he is as natural of a shooter as there is. So at Finklestein State, we would need an advantage creator or a playmaker, because I think that was really the problem last year in Milwaukee, among other things. But to me, he's a guy who plays off of space. He doesn't create space. So if you pair him with a guard who can make plays and initiate the offense himself, be that primary creator, and then Pat Baldwin can play on the second side of the floor. He can play in pick and pop action, or you can come down and attack or stretch the floor from the trail spot. I think those things at 6'10", the way he shoots the ball and the character, you know, he brings, I think he would be probably my next pick. I'm going to be fascinated. I know he said he's 99.9% in, but if he were to come back to college and if he were to go to one of these blue blood programs and step into a Duke, to a North Carolina, to something like that, where he's playing with other highly talented players and the burden of the entire offense doesn't rest on his shoulders, I really think that's a scenario where he would show his best basketball. And it's also a scenario, quite frankly, where I think you could see his draft stock take a significant jump, because we're talking about a guy who was a top 5 prospect throughout his entire high school career. It just didn't go well this year at Milwaukee.
Yeah, it's crazy that Finklestein State's only been around for 10 minutes and you guys are already cheating. But you know what? That's the way it is.
Nope. I'm not going down the Nick Saban road today. I'm not doing it.
All right. We'll still steer clear of the verbal jabs. But with Baldwin, I was going through and doing some NBA draft analysis blurbs for Kyle Boone's Big Board. It's a collective effort, and we just sort of make a few comments on players based off of what we saw during their college careers. And at the end of it, you're required to make a pro comparison. And I struggled a little bit with Pat Baldwin's pro comparison. I ended up settling on Cam Johnson just due to frame, due to the three-point shot being the primary skill for both players. Is that fair? Who would you comp Patrick Baldwin to, for those who didn't catch a whole lot of Milwaukee basketball this last year?
You know who he reminds me of, and this is I'm going way back on this one, but he reminds me a little bit of Donyell Marshall, because he's like, Donyell Marshall was really so, you know, I'm a UConn alum, so obviously I'm going back to my childhood here, but Donyell Marshall was a guy who was almost the original stretch 4, and someone who from the 4 spot could drag an opposing interior defender away from the basket, had a high release, which Pat Baldwin does. It was, ironically, I heard someone ask Pat this very question yesterday. He compared himself to Michael Porter. I don't know about that. I think Porter had a little more athleticism and kind of pop in his legs in terms of a leaper. But for me, he is just a pure shooting stretch 4 man. And so the guy he's always reminded me of, especially because of how high that ball comes off his hand, is Donyell Marshall.
I dig it. I dig it. All right. So a quick rundown. We mentioned Kevin McCullough already, commits to Kansas. That's a pretty big get. Not necessarily a guy who pops statistically, shot 29.9% his first few years in college, but a gritty, versatile defender who understands what it takes to win in the Big 12, toughest league in the country. So big get there. Also Xavier Pinson, for former Missouri and LSU guard, going to New Mexico State, which honestly pretty big get for the Aggies. A guy with some years under his belt, a team that loses its coach and Chris Jans and probably losing Teddy Allen, who's in the portal and going through the process of the pre-draft stuff. And then Umoja Gibson goes from Oklahoma to DePaul. So a few big ones there as of late. Adam, what are you hearing about AJ Green, a guy who we've not discussed yet, who he was in Chicago, right? So he's kind of going through the pre-draft stuff. Yes. There seems to be an underlying assumption that he's going to transfer. I mean, are we sure about that, or kind of what was the read on him this week?
Yeah, I think I think that's the assumption, is that, the feedback he got from the NBA isn't such that he's compelled to try and make that jump right now. And so what he told Travis Branham was that it's going to be Iowa State, where his dad's an assistant coach, or it's going to be Duke. I think the scenario at Duke, again, a lot of these decisions are predicated on other variables having to do with the NBA draft. And at Duke, that variable is Trevor Keels. Is Trevor Keels staying in the draft, or is he coming back? I think that if Trevor Keels decides to go back to Duke and he rejoins Jeremy Roach, and then you've got Dariq Whitehead and others in that backcourt, along with Jaden Shutt, another incoming freshman, all of a sudden it's pretty crowded. And that's not necessarily a desirable destination in terms of the immediate opportunity of playing time. Certainly not one that you're going to tell your dad no. And if history has shown us anything, I mean, we're just talking about Pat Baldwin, it's really hard to tell dad no. So Iowa State lost, obviously, a very key guy in the portal, but they also made a key acquisition last week with Osun Asunye. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. I've known him for years. He's a defensive monster. That's what I do know. And I think he's ready to block shots at an elite level, even beyond the Atlantic 10. So I think they're in a position where they are probably the favorite for Green. They've got the big man inside, and they're rebuilding through the transfer portal after really exceeding expectations last year.
Yeah, AJ Green as a backup plan for Duke is a pretty nice situation to be, but I'm kind of with you, man. Like, I just can't imagine that conversation going down. Like, hey, Dad, I appreciate everything. Like, I hear Ames has great tap water, and like I believe you, but I'm going to Duke. Like, are we cool?
Or how about this? Like, hey, son, what are you doing? Like, well, I'm gonna wait to see if Duke wants me. Just give me a couple more weeks, okay? The deadline's June 1st. I'll know then.
Yeah,
that is the date. Like, that is the date where it was funny. I asked Dalen Terry yesterday at Arizona, and he's not in the portal, but he is trying to. He's a guy that could really go either way. He's fringe first round pick. And I said to him, what are you thinking about? He said to me, like, I'm thinking about waiting until June 1st, and I'm gonna just really wait this out and see how it goes. But that June 1st deadline, that's when we're going to get dominoes that start to fall here. And it's going to have implications on a lot of different players.
Yeah, it's interesting. In AJ Green's case, man, Dad has the routing number there. Iowa State knows how to get straight into his bank account because, a lot of these other guys, it's like, all right, like what's the collective going to suggest is possible for you at your next college destination, or what does the bag man provide? But man, they got direct access with AJ Green. Interesting. Any other outstanding transfers that are interesting to you? I mean, a couple that I saw, F.A. Abogidi, who's been pretty good at Washington State going through the pre-draft process. Keon Brooks, leaving Kentucky, guy who we haven't heard a ton about in recent weeks. Any buzz around either of those guys or anybody else this week up in Chicago? Those guys who are in that gray area of of portal versus pros, and sort of navigating that over these next few weeks?
Yeah, the other guy in Chicago was Kenny Lofton, the wide-bodied kind of inside-out mismatch. I mean, he started in the G League Elite camp, which ran Monday and Tuesday, and basically how that went is they brought in kind of like it was basically like the JV camp. I know that's a terrible way to describe it, but they bring in the first round of guys, they play it out, they measure them, they do the combine activities, they play. It's more or less the same activities as the draft combine, but what they do then is they take the top handful of those guys and they move on to the draft combine. So it's basically a tryout camp for the combine itself. And Lofton was a guy who really impressed, didn't have quite as much buzz coming out of the major ranks, and especially, in a situation where they're measuring body fat and stuff like that. I mean, he's not gonna stand out in that type of setting, but he played really, really well. And I think that if he comes back to college, talked to him yesterday, he said his dad's really handling most of the recruitment stuff while he's focused on the NBA. If he were to go back to college, he's going to be a very interesting name in this portal, because you're talking about a versatile front court guy who can come in and create immediate mismatches. He didn't have any type of school list because, as I said, dad's handling that. He's focused on the NBA. But in terms of a name that's kind of generating some newfound momentum and could have implications at the high major level, I think his is certainly one that has come to the forefront this week.
Yeah, Kenny Lofton is an interesting player, not to be confused also with the former Cleveland Indians outfielder. Very different body types and skill sets there. But no, he is what we used to call a tweener. I mean, as recently as 4 or 5 years ago, you heard guys like him referred to all the time as tweeners. These guys who could cut it as big men in college basketball, but maybe weren't big enough to really play in the front court in the NBA. Well, the NBA has transformed so much now to where there really is no such thing as tweeners. In fact, it's almost what franchises are after. They want the 6'8" guy. The 6'8" guy used to be a little bit too small to play in the front court, a little bit too big to really handle the ball, be a shooter on the outside. Well, now you got 6'7", 6'8", 6'9" who can do it all. And you know what? You look at a guy like Grant Williams, who's having a huge impact on the NBA playoffs right now with the Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals. And this is kind of a philosophical question, but it applies to, a handful of guys who are prominent right now in the sport. EJ Liddell, somebody who's getting first round buzz, somebody who would have been considered a tweener in years past. I mean, am I right here? Am I reading this correctly? It seems as though the undersized or bulky four who can handle the ball a little bit and shoot from the corners is like a pretty in-demand thing now, when 4 or 5 years ago that was a player that we were turning our nose up at.
Yeah, I think offensively that is accurate. I think the key variable is how versatile they are defensively. I mean, a lot of the guys that we're talking about who can go to the NBA can not only play multiple positions offensively, but they can defend multiple positions. Grant Williams is a guy who at 6'7", 6'8", they'll use him as a small ball 5 at times. And Boston, I was actually thinking about this. I was watching the Boston-Miami game on the plane coming back from Chicago last night. The narrative about the NBA is how everybody's playing small, but you watch Boston out there and they're still playing with 2 bigs. I mean, they got Williams and Al Horford there. So I think the thing in the NBA is oftentimes, I think we, as the media, we want to say like, hey, everybody's playing like Golden State with Draymond at the 5 or whatever. But, there's different trends that evolve at different times in the NBA. I mean, the NBA MVP for the last 2 years has been a big man. Obviously, he's not a traditional 5-man. But I do think that things are evolving, but they're constantly evolving. So I don't think we can say like, hey, size isn't the premium it once was in the NBA. That's certainly the narrative. That's what a lot of people are saying. But I think a lot of this stuff is cyclical and circumstantial. And so, I think you could see somebody take some size and make use of it. But in terms of the guys you're talking about specifically, those kind of skilled, more broader built kind of forwards, I think the key variable there is who they can defend. And I think that's the area that Kenny Lofton in particular, that's the question he hasn't answered yet. And that's could be the reason why he ultimately comes back to college.
Yeah, it's fascinating. We've got a few more weeks to all this kind of plays out in advance of the NBA draft withdrawal deadline, then of course the NBA draft, and eventually at some point these college basketball rosters are going to get settled. The transfers will announce their destinations. Until then, we'll be here periodically discussing these things and hamming it up a little bit. Adam, any parting thoughts, anything portal related or combine related that we didn't touch on today?
No, it's been a busy week. I think last week was very much about the portal, especially with all those commitments that came down at the end of the week. I thought Florida, we didn't mention them, but I thought they did really, really well, picking up a point guard who's going to be in Lofton.
Right?
Yeah, who's going to make a big impact down there. That to me was one of the sneaky good pickups of in the portal so far, because you're talking about a guy who's got NCAA tournament experience and who can lead not only a team offensively, but a team defensively. He's an elite defender and a terrific guy to establish your defense in terms of the point of attack. So I think that was a really good pickup on what was a very busy Friday in the portal last week.
Yeah, we'll see how Todd Golden's roster shapes up. He's hit on a few guys so far, and they are among the finalists for Abajidi from Washington State, who's a pretty good shot blocker as well. So,
and the irony there is he used to work for Kyle Smith. So, he's recruiting a guy who's leaving his former boss. So I don't know if that helps him or hurts him in that pursuit, but that's a fascinating dynamic to that whole situation.
It certainly is. Well, we'll be keeping tabs on that and all the other transfer portal related stories at 247sports.com and cbssports.com as well. So appreciate you guys tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next episode of the Eye on College Basketball YouTube special.